Okay, so look, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar this morning. My name is Sarah Brown, and I'm the Pacific leader of Mercer Marsh Benefits, and I'm really delighted to have you all with us today to look at the 2022 release of our Australian People Risk Report. Now, this is part of our global people risk research, which is looking at the attitudes towards the greatest risks facing organisations with respect to their people, and also the challenges that companies have in mitigating those risks. Now, this report is in its second year, and look, what a complex couple of years it's been. I think for people in HR and risk management roles, it's been a really challenging time, and I actually truly believe that that isn't going to change anytime soon. I think that we are all currently in the most challenging times that we will face in our careers, at least those of us who are responsible for managing people and managing the impact of people risk. And look, I know that the spectrum of people that we have on the call today cover the full range of HR, finance, risk management or safety. So we're really pleased to have a number of different perspectives on the call today. Now, I think it's fair to say that organisations right now are operating in an ongoing, with the impact of the ongoing global pandemic, with a fatigued and often burnt out workforce, managing people and budgets in the face of inflation. And obviously, those of you that watched the budget last night will certainly see that, that the outlook there, is that we are likely to continue to see high inflation. And we're going to continue to have to navigate this hybrid workplace that we are all working in at the moment. Now, all of this requires a re-look really at risks and a reprioritisation of those risks and a thinking about new ways of how we actually do this. People risks touches every aspect of our business. It's not just an HR issue or a risk management issue. It really takes collaboration right from the top down through to line managers to address some of these, quite serious and very pervasive risks. And look, there is, I think, a real opportunity now as we reassess the priorities to do things differently and to look at people risks in a more integrated way that really recognises the connections between the various risks and how we can better manage those together. Look, before we start on the webinar, I do want to acknowledge I do want to do an acknowledgement of country. And look, today I'm speaking to you from our Melbourne office, and I'm on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Now, the Wurundjeri people's name explained the importance of this country to them. So Wurrun means the manna gum tree, which is common along the Birrarung, which is also known as the Yarra River, and that runs through, as you will know, Melbourne. And you can see the artwork on the screen. Now, Jerry is the edible grub which is found in the trees. So the Wurundjeri people were proudly known as the Witchetty grub people. And this land and the waterways, the trees and even the grubs were so critical to their thriving on this land for thousands of years. So I'd like to pay my deep respects to the Wurundjeri elders past and present, and also to celebrate the diversity of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their cultures and connections to the lands and waters across Australia, in recognition of the traditional owners of the countries which you are all dialing in from today. I'd also like to extend my respects to the First Nations people who are present with us on the call today. So let's go through and have a look at the agenda for the session today. It's really to unpack those findings from the recent People Risk Report research. And we're going to hear from a number of people from our Mercer Marsh Benefits team, and I'm really proud that they can join us today. And we're going to provide you with some insights into the major research findings. So, but we're also going to suggest some ways which we think that, that you can start to address or mitigate and manage these risks. So hopefully there'll be some practical applications that you can take back to your business after the session today. So firstly, we're going to go into what is the People Risk Report, and then we're going to address the 4 key findings of the report. And those are the ones that you see on your screen: workforce health and safety, the rise of environmental and social risks, the role of governance, and the need for an enterprise-wide approach. So as we go through this session, if you do have any questions, we have allowed some time at the end for Q&A. Please feel free to put them in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and we will either answer them as we go through or certainly at the end of the session today. Please make sure that you use the Q&A function, not the chat, so that we can make sure that we've got the questions there to review. So let me now hand over to Nicola Sacre, who's going to provide some background on the research and some high-level results.
Hi there. Good morning to everybody, and thanks very much, Sarah. So let's start with people risk. What is people risks? So people risks are simply defined as business risks which are generated by your workforce. And our people risk research is based, as Sarah said, on global research, which has covered over 2,500 organisations across the globe. And in Australia specifically, we had 106 participants to our Australian survey. So in this survey, we identified 25 people risks, which are seen here on the screen now. And these are categorised across 5 different categories: health and safety, governance and financial, accelerated digitisation, talent practices, and environmental and social. So I'm going to be sharing with you the top 10 ratings of these risks, so the risks that were rated as the top 10 most critical as seen in Australia right now. And then we're going to hear from some of my colleagues who are going to do a bit of a deeper dive into the health and safety pillar, governance and financial, and the environmental and social pillar. So the simplest way for us to illustrate, as I say, these comprehensive results is to create a ranking system. And the way that we've done that is to consolidate 2 of the scores. First of all, what's the likelihood? We asked what's the likelihood that this risk is going to occur in your organisation in the coming 3 years. And then the other score was, and what's the severity of the impact of that risk if it was to occur? So let's have a look at how that played out in the Australian results. Oh, I'm just having some trouble moving those slides along. There we go. Hopefully what you can see on your screen right now is the top 10 risks in Australia. And what you'll see there are 3 columns. The first is the consolidation of all respondents and participants to the survey in Australia. And then you'll see that we separate the responses by 2 separate groups or roles within an organisation, the HR professionals and risk managers. So the first thing to note from these results is that cybersecurity and data privacy is the #1 ranking risk across the board. And this is also reflected in all of the global data in every country, in every region. We see cybersecurity and data privacy as that #1 risk. And that's certainly no surprise, right? So we've seen in the last few weeks, there's been a number of major high-profile data breaches. And so it is not a surprise that this continues to be a major concern. Now, the World Economic Forum Risk Report 2022 states that 95% of all data breaches are down to human error. And it's this this human error component which registers this as a people risk. So the second thing to note is that when you look down those responses, the pandemic is still really playing out in these results, shaping conversations about how we manage people and employee support. Consider their catastrophic personal risk events, the changing nature of work, pandemics and other communicable health conditions, working conditions, and it goes on. Now, it is to note that the results were taken earlier in the year, but certainly the flow on of the effect of the pandemic cannot be understated in terms of the way we are now managing people within our businesses. Now, if we look across the split, move now to the second and third pillar, and that's the split out of our HR respondents and our risk management respondents. And wow, there's quite a difference between the results there between those two scores. Now, remember, these scores are not actually priorities of each group, but they've come from a combined perceived likelihood and severity score. So there's really no shared view or common perspective about how these risks are viewed within an organisation, and a view of how much these risks could potentially damage an organisation. Now, it's not unsurprising to see that if we look at that HR pillar in the middle there, health and safety in the navy blue as a risk is all 5 of the health and safety risks are there and are of concern to HR. Now, last year, what is interesting is that last year, workforce exhaustion and mental health were number 2 and number 3. It didn't matter whether it was HR or a risk audience, it came up in the top 10 for both. And this year, that significantly dropped out. And Christy's going to talk to us more about that health and safety pillar in a moment. The other thing to note is in that risk category, the last column there, the rise of environmental and social risks. So last year, we only saw environment in the top 10 as a risk of concern of organisations. This year, that has changed drastically. The environmental and social is there on your screen in green, and the screen is awash with green risks that are now significant concerns for organisations. So let's talk about another significant part of the research, which was to look at what are the barriers that organisations are facing when addressing people risks. So the number 1 barrier there for health and safety is difficulty changing personal behaviours. And while education and changing behaviours still certainly has a place in workforce health management, it's really interesting that there's such a focus on this when we know that changing the environment to enable an employee to thrive is more effective than trying to change the person. If we look across all of the different pillars of risk, we also see there in green too many competing priorities. We also see in grey another key barrier, is the lack of skilled resources to understand and address risks. And then we also see a high prevalence barrier in organisational complexity, which includes siloed or confused responsibility. And it's our view that addressing that barrier, addressing the risk of organisational complexity is really key and the first step to remedy and manage all other barriers. And we're going to hear more about that from Blake later this morning. So if we don't get this right and we don't overcome these barriers to adequately address these risks, the consequences are numerous, and they're up there on your screen now. The cost of people risks. To sum that up, productivity goes down and costs go up. So businesses really cannot afford to not address these risks. So that's the top line or the summary of our People Risk 2022 results. And now I'm going to hand over to Christy, and Christy's going to do a little bit of a deeper dig on the health and safety pillar. So over to you, Christy.
Thank you, Nicola, and hello, everyone. So it's not surprising, as Nicola said, that cyber came out as the top 25 risks. It certainly seems with the current events that it's there for good reason. But what is interesting around our People Risk Report and the findings from it is that the health and safety pillar, like last year, remains to be the pillar that's recognised as the most serious concern for businesses. 85% of businesses recognise this as a serious concern. And no doubt you're all very aware of this. It's your day job. So addressing the health, safety and wellbeing of your workforce has a number of impacts on businesses. Legal compliance being one of them. OHS and work health and safety legislation is a must do. The board and officers of organisations, they have a positive duty under the model work health and safety legislation for ensuring safety compliance. There are significant potentials, fines and jail time across many states and territories of Australia for serious injuries and fatalities. The other thing to think about is containment of disability insurance and workers' compensation claims costs. Workers' comp is a significant cost to business, no doubt for most likely all of you, the most expensive insurance premium that you will cover. And mental health claims in particular are continuing to rise across all insurance markets. Mental health claims are the largest contributor to costs. They might not be the most frequent, but they are creating real sustainability issues across all lines of disability and workers' comp insurance. And of course, the other impact of health, safety and wellbeing is sometimes a little harder to measure, but it's really on productivity, efficiency, attraction, retention and engagement of workers. And we all know that's a key to business at the moment because we are in the midst of a real talent crisis. So if we look at the next slide, within the health and safety pillar, mental health has been rated as the #1 risk likely to impact organisations over the next 3 years. I'll just wait for the slide to catch up. Here we go. So on the slide is an illustration on mental health that you can find in our People Risk infographic. You can access it with the People Risk report. And the tip of the iceberg, this type of demonstration is very, very relevant to people. It's what you might see around mental health, but underlying the mental health issues can be an array of issues, both personal and work-related, that can or are likely to affect your business's operations. And we are indeed in a mental health crisis. Workplaces are fatigued, people are at risk of burnout, and psychosocial risk has been added this year to the model work health and safety legislation. It's been adopted in New South Wales as of the 1st of October, so very recent, and soon to be adopted in other states and territories. We've also got the introduction of the psychosocial risk codes of practice across a number of different states and territories already that can be used to demonstrate legal compliance and certainly used in a prosecution. So now is the time to be acting to address mental health issues as a serious business risk. We know it's high in the people risk and we know that regulators are really focusing on it. Let's talk about this a little bit further in a moment. So if we look at the risks being addressed right now, I'll just move the slide. Thank you, Nicola. 3 of the top 5 risks that respondents are addressing are from the health and safety pillar. So it's certainly no surprise that 85% were rating health and safety as the most serious concern. So those are health and wellbeing, pandemic and other communicable health conditions. So it'll be very interesting to see where that one goes next year. And of course, mental health. And the same risks are also investment priorities, with at least half of organisations indicating that there'll be investment in these risks over the next 1 to 2 years. I'm quite surprised at that sometimes, because I think, and certainly talking to our clients, I would think that almost every single person on this call would be investing in at least 1 to 2 of these over the next 1 to 2 years, if not all of them. So really now is the time to review your investment priorities. Think about where your people risk key priorities for investment are. Are these similar to yours, or are they different? And so in my final slide, there's a key call to action for you today. Really consider mental health as a key investment priority for people risk. Ensure your organisation complies with the new psychosocial risk requirements, and ensure that you use a data-led approach. So understanding really what's happening within the organisation to direct your activities and get a clear return for your investment. Thank you. I'll now pass on to Beth Hill.
Thank you, Christy. Lovely to see you all here on the call. My name's Beth Hill and I'm the Wellbeing Program Manager here at MMB. So what we're really seeing in the ESG space is, sorry, I have just lost my slide, is the really interesting finding that the ESG risks are now in the top 10 component compared to what they were last year. So we had 4 in the top 10 where we only saw 1 last year. So this is unsurprising given the C-suite's growing attention on ESG in recent years. And we're finding organisations are really increasing the pressure that they need to not just meet profit, but come to the party and also make sure they're not just making profits at the expense of the society or the planet. So when we break down the results of the HR and the risk groups, we're seeing that the risks are rated actually quite high between the risk managers, particularly when it comes to the severity of those risks. So the top rated risks that we can see here on the right, the first one is the catastrophic life events, which is really coming off the back of the pandemic. So this was a really consistent global finding, unsurprisingly, given that context. And with the heightened concern around illness and critical illness, death and disability, and other major life events that resulted as part of the lockdown, it's unsurprising that we're really seeing that attention grow. And when it comes to somebody's life being disrupted, we're learning that business is also disrupted. Number 6 we saw in the SG group was working conditions and labour relations. So this was a really interesting report that I encourage you to take a look at in the report, or an interesting statistic. But at a high level, this is saying that people don't just want a job, they want a good job and to find meaning in their work. So number 7, we saw diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion. And this is a risk that is really worth discussing. So it combines the score of the people risks and the HR risks, and we saw that come out at number 7. But this is the one that we saw the greatest divergence in the risk rating between these two groups. So for risk managers, it came out as number 2, whereas for HR managers, it came out at number 16. So quite a big difference there, which is quite interesting, but still number 7 globally. So this is an indication that issues like diversity, equity, inclusion are not being assessed across the organisation as a holistic picture, and a siloed approach is being taken to these matters. So one part of the organisation isn't interacting with the other to manage these major risks. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is more about just gender diversity and having more women in leadership roles. It's really about people who identify as LGBTQI, or people with culturally different backgrounds, or neurodivergence and disabilities, and how does an employer interact with them and make a good proposition for them in the workplace. It also includes employees returning to work from disability, and it's important to focus on ability rather than disability and ensure any barriers are removed from them returning to the workplace. So when it comes to DEI, it's also important to create an inclusive workplace for minorities. It's ensuring the workplace is physically and psychologically safe for everybody, and really making sure that there's an equitable provision of employee benefits across diverse groups of employees. And last, number 10 is environment. And this has been a top 10 when it comes to mind for ESG for obvious reasons. It's undeniably significant in addressing the environmental responsibilities that businesses like yourselves have. However, we're seeing a shift in attention from the E in environment across to the S in the social side of things. And employee wellbeing and addressing this DEI space again through wellbeing is a big part of the social consideration. So the key call to actions that you should really be taking a look at for this report is reviewing your insurance to protect against these catastrophic life events, which came out as number 2. So whilst employees are insured for work-related incidents, financial protection against non-work-related illness and injuries and discretionary benefits creates a compelling employee value proposition. So managing the flow and effect of catastrophic life events throughout the organisation is an important point as well, making sure that the person who is directly affected by the catastrophic event isn't the only one that you're looking at, that you're also looking at what psychological support is there for the organisation and for employees in their teamwork as well. And lastly, mapping the ESG future objectives, including DEI and the workforce wellbeing strategy. So the results of this report give you the opportunity to ask, what are you doing in this ESG space and what role do you play? Your organisation should also be looking at how are you measuring ESG and the performance to help you map towards an aspirational ESG future strategy and objectives for yourselves as well. And looking at tools like our ESG tool to actually measure and score yourself and understand where you sit in that ranking. That is all from me. Over to you now, Nicole.
Thank you, Beth. So my name is Nicole Van Dugtun. I am the Client Executive Team Leader for the Group Life and Disability team. I'm going to run through the governance and financial pillar. So administration and fiduciary risk is Australia's number 4 risk. This speaks to an organisation's concern around administration of things like compensation, superannuation, and people risk insurances to ensure accuracy and fairness, and that they're in line with the promise made to an employee and or any legal obligations. So for example, in my line of business, which is group life and disability insurances, salary continuous insurance can be built in as part of an employee's contract. It's important that with the changes that we make to the terms and conditions or policy wordings, that the cover still meets the requirements of the contract. Similarly, with income protection insurance, typically this can be written into enterprise bargaining agreements, and that must match the agreement promised to the employees. When we think about the critical importance of administration of pay and benefits correctly, it is no surprise that organisations rate this risk as having a real significant impact if it goes wrong. It is more surprising, however, that organisations feel that the controls that they do have in place are not adequate, meaning the likelihood of something to go wrong is actually quite high. The impact of an error in pay, benefits and superannuation could be enormous on employee trust, your reputation and brand. 42% of organisations have stated that they would be investing in risk management strategies around administration and fiduciary risks in the next 1 to 2 years. The rising cost of health, risk protection and wellbeing policies is possibly a blind spot. Employee benefit costs, workers' compensation costs, and wellbeing costs are all rising at remarkable rates. And we've seen increases in workers' compensation rates, as I'm sure everyone on this call has, across most states. And the states that have remained stable have done so despite significant losses. So ultimately, future increases are therefore inevitable. Income protection and total disability insurance costs, again, that's my line, are having real sustainability issues. With costs increasing around 30% at a minimum every 2 to 3 years. And the majority of organisations do not have an articulated cost containment strategy for these expenses. And finally, at the end of the day, at its most basic, governance and financial risks comes down to legislative compliance. Workers' compensation, superannuation, physical and psychological safety are all bound by legal obligations. Employee health and wellbeing is a board responsibility. It carries fines and possible jail time for not meeting these obligations. And some of you might have been across this yourselves, but this year we saw a really interesting High Court decision that came down in favour of an employee being awarded damages for psychological injury, where it was found an employer did not sufficiently protect an employee who was exposed to traumatic material in her line of work. And subsequently, she developed PTSD. Nicola showed us that some of the barriers to addressing the risks is the lack of skilled resources to understand and therefore actually address the risk. So if you're not sure when it comes down to legislative compliance, this is certainly the time to outsource. If you go to the next slide, Nicola, I'll run through some calls to action. So be aware of projected cost increases of people risk insurances, such as disability insurance, private medical insurance, and workers' compensation, and develop a cost containment strategy for sustainability of these costs. Collaborate across your organisation to form a shared view of people risk priorities. Focus on developing effective policies and procedures for your top priorities. That's all from me. I am now going to hand over to Blake Gleeson.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, everyone. My name is Blake Gleeson, and I'm the Chief Client Officer for MMB Australia. So as you can see in this diagram, when we are talking about people risks, we are talking about the critical point at which risk and finance meets people and culture. As you've seen in today's presentation, the research shows us that whilst there are some shared concerns across the different stakeholders, there are also a number of differing priorities across HR and risk. And this in itself introduces additional risk, because when departments within an organisation work in silos, they don't leverage the benefits of pooled budgets, resources, and skills and data, and address these risks in the most efficient way they can. This is why a structured enterprise risk management approach is so important. If companies continue to work in silos, they'll miss out on the opportunity to address the very real risks that lay ahead of us. Next slide, please, Nick. Okay, so here we have a number of friendly faces, each of whom have specific agendas, which I'm sure each of you on the call will relate to. We have finance, we have HR, we have risk management, we have health and safety. So as we've discussed today, if we look across the agendas of each of these departments or people, whilst they have some differing concerns, there are also a lot of similarities. And many of these, we hope, will ultimately ladder up to higher collective business objectives. However, organisations are also telling us, as you've heard today, that the lack of skilled resources and organisational complexity is actually a barrier to addressing people risks. So imagine how more effective each of these people or departments could be if they could get additional skilled resources and remove this organisational complexity. Now, our MMB team have experienced some real success in building these bridges and helping organisations come together to collaborate on some of these big issues. Now, this might be through a top-down approach where we engage the C-suite to then band together their leaders across finance, risk, insurance, and HR, or in other cases where we may facilitate a combined meeting of departments to educate and help them to collaborate on these shared responsibilities. Now, regardless of which approach is taken, the key point is to simply bring these agendas or departments together, agree on the key shared priorities, and then combine budgets, resources, and skills to address these risks in a single enterprise-wide approach. Next slide, please, Nick. I think we might have one in between. Anyway, so this now brings us into the MMB people risk cycle, which hones in on people risks which specifically result from workforce illness, injury, and well-being. Now, we'll see a slide in a moment, we'll see a little video in a moment, but you'll see that when organisations can only take a strategic approach to keep employees safe and productive above the health line, if they recognise people risks as interrelated. Now, I'd like to play a little short video which will explain our MMB people risk cycle a little further. Thanks, Nick.
When your staff are physically, mentally and emotionally healthy and protected, your business will be, in turn, healthy and protected. And when a company looks after its people like this, risk is reduced, costs go down, and the business culture and reputation goes up. But some companies tend to focus on problems after they arise, not before. Imagine a health line. Above the line are healthy employees. Below the line are sick or injured employees. By focusing time, budget and effort above the line, you can minimise the impact of ill health and injury below the line. This is the perfect example of intelligent risk management. To help you, Mercer Marsh Benefits has the experience, the expertise and the solutions to enable your people and your business to thrive. We'll be with you wherever you are on your journey to creating or sustaining a healthy, protected, productive workforce. We can help you to attract and retain the best talent through a culture of care and well-being and competitive benefits. We use data insights, informing health, safety and well-being programs to manage the risk of mental and physical illness and injury and the risk of cultural or reputational damage. And if anyone falls below the line with an illness or injury, your business will be covered and your people are financially protected through appropriate, compliant and cost-effective insurance. If they need help with rehabilitation, they'll get it, helping them back above the line to be a healthy, productive and thriving employee once again. It's a cycle. Mercer Marsh Benefits will partner with you throughout this cycle, helping you with every aspect at every step. Because when your people are healthy and protected, your business is healthy and protected.
Thanks, Nick. Over to you, Nick.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. And hopefully that's given you all, good insight. I think the video and the cycle really brings to life the idea that people risks are interrelated in nature. And as Blake has said, the best outcomes are from addressing these collectively. Now, this morning we've heard from Christy on health and safety, and strategic data-led management of employee health and safety is encouraged adequately to address risks. Now, Beth talked to us about the environmental and social risks that now account for 4 out of the top 10 risks. And the ESG agenda, which is focusing on the social risks that each of you have and may play a role in your organisation. So Nicholas shared with us that only 1/3 of respondents felt that their policies regarding people risk management are effective, which just highlights really, I think, the importance again of prioritisation and making sure that you have a really robust governance structure to manage those people risks. And of course, I think Blake also emphasised that the importance of that enterprise-wide approach. So I think, we really encourage you to think about this and to connect, internally with stakeholders who are focusing on this, and certainly reach out to us, if you'd like a wider conversation, and we'd certainly be delighted to support you in any way. But look, let me now open up the floor for some Q&A, and I think we've got a couple of questions that have come through before we finish. So look, I think, Blake, there's one here for you, and I think this is a really interesting one, maybe slightly controversial, but thank you to whoever sent that one through. But why do you think that the risk managers and HR managers have such a different view on risks?
So, look, it's a really great question, but I think while we see this, it's the nature of their daily roles and their daily activities, and I think that the HR managers, not talking on behalf of any HR managers on the line, but I think if you look at the key risks the HR managers put forward, it is very much about the people. It is about the health and safety, which health and safety often comes in underneath that HR type role. It's about the wellness of the people. It's very much around that people, which you'd expect a human, the trick's in the name, right? The human resources people would be focusing on. I think the risk managers have a broader remit in their area of responsibility and accountability, where they're looking at risk across the whole of the organisation. So, and I think that really makes sense of why ESG is very much up on their the radar now, and broader risks outside of that, traditional human HR activity. And I think the results this year have really highlighted that. ESG has become much more prominent, as Beth talked about. And guess what? The ESG has become much more prominent in the risk management space in this year's survey.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds about right. So certainly, I think there's another question probably for you. I think Nicole, probably best to tackle this one. This one is from somebody who says they've had crazy income protection premium increases. Are other organisations still offering this benefit? So is this a benefit that others still offer?
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of spoke to this on my slides too. They're not getting rid of the benefits. It's obviously quite difficult to, of course, get rid of the benefits, but we don't really want to get rid of the benefit either. There's a reason why the premiums are going up, and that's because people are claiming. What we more see, rather than terminating the policy altogether, is putting in place strategies to try and reduce the premium in another way. So whether that be changing the benefit design, the waiting period, the benefit period, etc. That's probably more an extreme and instantaneous reduction of the premium. But if you're looking for more of a sustainability change and reduction in your premium, we can look at claims. So where have your claims been? What type of your employee is quite frequently claiming? Which type of claims are they claiming on? So mental health or musculoskeletal. And then coming in and actually developing a strategy around trying to improve the physical and mental health of your employees before they even get to claim. And then finally, helping people that are on claim get back to work. It's in everyone's best interest that they do that in a healthy and safe manner. And then we can just naturally reduce the premiums by reducing the claims risk. So certainly still a benefit that we see, and it's a great benefit and people aren't terminating it. We just have to do couple of little tweaks here and there, especially on the claims piece, to try and control the costs.
Yeah. And I think that, now more than ever, these types of benefits are, just critically important, aren't they, for companies to have in place. So, I think those of us that have lived through financial crisis and, in the past will understand that, that now is the time when the employee benefits and the things that we offer within companies are really important for our employees. So look, I think we've got a hard stop at 11:45, and we always want to make sure that we honour those stops. So look, there are a couple of other questions that we've got there, but I think what we'll do is we'll wrap those up and respond back to everybody. Somebody's asked, are the slides available? Certainly the whole people risk report is available online, so we'll make sure that people know where to access that if they've not already got a copy. But as I said, please feel free to reach out to any of your team, and we would sort of happily go through it in a bit more detail. Thanks everyone on the call today who's attended, and thanks to the panel for your great insights today. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.